I knew my marriage was in trouble when my wife started talking to me like I was the assistant manager of a property we both happened to live in. Not her husband. Not her partner. Not the man she used to meet at the door with a smile that made the whole day feel lighter. Just the guy responsible for the garbage disposal, the electric bill, and whether we had enough paper towels in the pantry. My name is Scott. I'm 41, and if you had asked me a year ago whether I thought my wife was cheating, I would have said no without hesitation. Unhappy maybe. Distant definitely. Tired, stressed, checked out, all the usual words people use when they're trying to make something sound temporary. But cheating? No. I wasn't there yet. Back then, I still thought the biggest problem in my marriage was that it had gone flat. Not explosive. Not openly hateful. Just flat in that dead, gray way that starts eating a house from the inside. My wife, Dana, and I had been married for 12 years. No kids. Just a two-story place in the suburbs outside Indianapolis, one aging golden retriever named Rusty, and enough shared routines to make us look solid from the outside. I worked as a facilities manager for a medical office network. Long hours, too many phone calls, constant problem solving, but steady money and steady work. Dana was a procurement coordinator for a manufacturing company. She dealt with vendors, shipping schedules, internal approvals, the kind of corporate stuff that always sounded dull until you realized how much power people can hide inside boring jobs. For the first several years, we were good. Not perfect, but real. Easy. We had our own language, our own rhythm. She used to text me in the middle of the day just to ask if I was thinking about her. We used to sit on the back patio with a couple drinks and laugh about people we knew, old stories, stupid things we'd seen at the grocery store. Even when life got repetitive, there was still warmth under it. A current. A feeling that whatever the day had been, we still came back to each other. Then somewhere along the way, marriage turned into management. It happened slowly enough that I kept telling myself not to overreact. At first it was just shorter conversations. Less eye contact. Fewer little touches in passing. Then the only things Dana brought to me were tasks. The gutter over the garage was leaking. Her mother wanted us at brunch Sunday. The grocery app needed updating. The guest bathroom sink was draining slowly. Did I remember to pay the insurance renewal? Had I called the guy about the fence latch? Could I pick up allergy medicine on the way home? Nothing was wrong with any one of those things. That's normal married life. Houses need things. Families are work. Bills don't pay themselves. But when those become the only language left, you feel it. After a while, I realized entire weeks were passing where my wife only looked directly at me if she needed an answer, a favor, or confirmation that something had been handled. If I came in the door, she'd ask whether I brought the dog food. If I sat down near her on the couch, she'd remember we needed to book the HVAC service. If I asked how her day was, I'd get a clipped summary about a delayed order or some idiot in accounting, then silence. No follow-up. No curiosity. No "what about yours?" I became useful. That was different from being loved. I tried to talk about it the first few times in a reasonable way. I didn't accuse her of anything. Didn't make speeches. I just said she felt far away. I said it didn't seem like we enjoyed each other anymore. I said I missed us. She'd always react the same way. A sigh first. Then that faintly irritated look people get when they think they're being dragged into a conversation beneath them. She said I was being dramatic. Said this was what marriage turned into after enough years. Said it wasn't supposed to feel like dating forever. She actually said that once while unloading the dishwasher, like she was explaining a basic fact of adulthood to someone too immature to understand it. Marriage is not supposed to be romantic forever. That line stayed with me. Not because it sounded wise. Because it sounded rehearsed. Too smooth. Too dismissive. Like something she'd already decided was true because it made her side of the distance feel noble and mine feel childish. I remember one night in particular. It was late, maybe 10:30, and we were both in the living room. Rusty was asleep by the fireplace. Dana was on her laptop, half working, half scrolling. I sat beside her and put my hand on her knee. Not in some desperate way. Just gently. Husband to wife. She didn't even look up. She just moved my hand aside so she could cross her legs and keep reading. I asked if she ever noticed how little we touched anymore. She shut the laptop, but not because she wanted to talk. Because she was annoyed. Then came the speech. Again. People change. Marriage evolves. Emotional intensity settles. Not every relationship is built around affection. She said maybe I needed to stop expecting some movie version of connection from a real adult life. Movie version. I sat there listening to my own wife talk about tenderness like it was a childish product I should have outgrown by now, and something in me started hardening in a way I didn't fully understand yet. Because deep down, I knew what she was saying didn't match what I was seeing. Dana still had warmth in her. She just didn't have it for me. That took longer to admit. At first it came in little flashes. She'd be on her phone in the kitchen and suddenly laugh under her breath at something on the screen. Not a polite exhale. A real laugh. Alive. Easy. Once I heard her on a work call from the dining room and she sounded lighter than she had sounded with me in months. Quick. Warm. Engaged. The kind of voice you use when you're genuinely enjoying the person on the other end. Then I'd walk in, and the warmth would vanish like I had stepped into a room and scared it off. I started noticing how fast her face changed when she looked down at certain messages. How some notifications softened her instantly. How she could be cold and distracted all evening, then suddenly bright for 20 seconds because of whatever had just lit up her screen. The first time I felt real unease, not just hurt, was over a name. Eric. At first he was just a coworker the way lots of people at your spouse's job are just coworkers. A name inside stories about delays, meetings, pricing issues, office nonsense. Eric said the supplier was impossible. Eric had to jump on another call. Eric caught the mistake before it got worse. Eric thought the new guy in planning was an idiot. Normal stuff. Harmless stuff. Except his name kept coming up. More than everybody else's. And Dana said it differently. Not flirtatiously. Nothing that obvious. It was subtler than that. There was energy in it. A looseness. The kind of unconscious emphasis you use when someone matters in a way you haven't admitted out loud yet. I noticed because I'd been starving for any sign of life from her, and every time his name entered the room, some flicker of that life showed up. I tried not to read into it. I really did. I told myself work friendships happen. Of course some people come up more than others. Of course she might connect better with one coworker. That didn't mean anything by itself. I knew that. I didn't want to become one of those suspicious husbands building a case out of tone and instinct. But once I stopped chasing her, once I stopped begging for closeness and started just watching, the pattern got harder to ignore. Dana never laughed with me anymore. Not really. But she laughed all the time in fragments I wasn't meant to see. At her phone while stirring pasta on the stove. At her earbuds while folding laundry in the bedroom. At some message preview she'd answer from the hallway instead of right beside me on the couch. She wasn't dead inside. She wasn't exhausted beyond feeling. She wasn't too mature for warmth or too evolved for affection. She was still reachable. I just wasn't the one reaching her. That realization settled into me slowly, like cold water rising in a basement before you notice it's already at your ankles. Then one Thursday evening, I got home earlier than usual because a contractor canceled on me last minute. Dana didn't hear me coming through the garage. Rusty barely lifted his head. I could hear her voice from the kitchen before I saw her, soft. Almost playful. She was talking to someone on speaker while rinsing vegetables at the sink, and the tone in her voice stopped me cold before the words even registered. It was the voice she used to use with me years earlier when life was still easy between us. Relaxed, amused, almost intimate without quite crossing the line. Then I heard the name. Eric. I didn't step into the kitchen right away. I just stood there in the hallway with one hand still on the wall, listening. She was laughing at something he said. Not work laughing. Not the flat polite laugh people used to keep a conversation moving. This was warm. Effortless. Familiar. And in that moment, before I had proof of anything physical, before I had a confession, before I had anything concrete enough to show another person, I understood something that hurt more than the affair itself ever would. My wife had not become incapable of closeness. She had simply changed the address where she sent it. I stood in that hallway longer than I should have, listening to my wife laugh with another man in the exact tone she kept insisting no longer existed in her. That was the part that got me. Not the name. Not even the secrecy, at least not at first. It was the warmth. The ease. The fact that I had spent months being told I was immature, dramatic, unrealistic, too attached to some fantasy version of marriage, while she was standing in my kitchen proving none of that was true. She still had softness. She still had playfulness. She still knew how to sound close to someone. Just not to me. I stepped into the kitchen on purpose, loud enough that the floor creaked before she saw me. Her whole face changed. The smile disappeared so fast it was almost violent. She grabbed the phone from the counter, turned off speaker, and said she had to go in this clipped, businesslike tone that sounded nothing like the voice I'd just heard. Then she ended the call and looked at me with a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't name right away. Not guilt exactly. More like annoyance that her worlds had brushed against each other without warning. I asked who she was talking to. She said work. Just that. Work. I looked at the vegetables in the sink, the cutting board, the phone still lit up in her hand, and asked whether work was funny now. That got me one of those tight little laughs she used when she wanted to make me seem ridiculous without actually saying the word. She said people at work were allowed to joke sometimes. Then she asked why I was home early, like that was the more relevant issue. That was when I really stopped trying to have honest conversations with her. Because honest conversations require one honest person on the other side. I just nodded, took off my jacket, scratched Rusty behind the ears, and acted like nothing in me had shifted. But something had. Quietly. Permanently. That night over dinner, Dana barely spoke unless it was about practical things. The mailbox key was sticking again. Her sister wanted confirmation about Thanksgiving. The upstairs smoke detector might need a new battery. I sat there chewing through a reheated chicken breast while my wife moved comfortably back into the role she seemed to prefer with me now, co-owner of obligations, co-manager of maintenance, roommate with paperwork. And yet 20 minutes earlier, she'd been someone else. I couldn't stop thinking about that. After dinner, she took her phone to the laundry room under the excuse of switching over a load that did not need switching yet. She was gone maybe 7 minutes. Long enough to send a message. Long enough to reset whatever emotional current had been interrupted by me walking in. When she came back out, she looked composed again. Flat. Efficient. Like the version of her that lived with me had resumed her shift. I said nothing. That became my strategy. Not because I was afraid to ask questions. Because I had started to understand that direct questions only taught her where to tighten up. If I said Eric's name too early, if I made the mistake of letting suspicion show before I understood the pattern, she would just retreat deeper into her language about work stress and adult reality and my unrealistic expectations. I was done handing her the map. So I pulled back more. I stopped initiating almost everything. Stopped trying to make dinners feel like dates. Stopped reaching for her hand in the car just to have her let it sit there limp for 3 seconds before taking it back. Stopped asking whether she wanted to watch something together at night. Stopped offering up little bits for connection she could casually step over on her way to somewhere emotionally brighter. And once I did that, I started seeing more than I expected. Dana filled the extra silence immediately, but not with me. She was on her phone more than ever. Not obviously, not like a teenager glued to a screen. She was too controlled for that. It was subtler. A quick glance while pouring coffee. A private smile at the kitchen island. A muted notification answered from the hallway instead of the couch. If I walked into a room while she was texting, the screen angle changed by reflex before she even fully registered I was there. One Saturday morning, I was in the garage sorting through a mess of extension cords and old paint cans when I heard her laughing through the open mudroom door. A real laugh. Low and easy, the kind that makes you instantly picture the face on the other end even when you can't hear the full conversation. I wiped my hands on a rag and came inside. The laugh vanished before I reached the kitchen. She was standing by the sink with her phone pressed to her ear, looking out the back window. When she turned and saw me, she said she had to call back, then disconnected. Same pattern. Same quick erasure. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't have to. The point wasn't whether she'd say his name. The point was that by now I knew there was a version of her voice I only got to hear by accident. Later that day, she was in a noticeably better mood. That was another detail I started cataloging. Not in some obsessive detective way at first. Just enough to notice the rhythm. Dana would be distant, annoyed, even cold for hours. Then some exchange would happen on her phone, or some call would end abruptly when I entered the room, and afterwards she'd be lighter. More patient. More relaxed. As if whatever she was getting elsewhere left just enough emotional overflow for her to stop treating me like static. That kind of thing does something to a man. Because you realize you're not witnessing your marriage recover. You're witnessing it being subsidized by someone else. The next real shift came at a work event. Dana's company held some supplier appreciation dinner downtown, and spouses were technically invited. She told me about it late, almost like she hoped I'd have a reason not to come. I went anyway. Not because I wanted to play investigator. Because part of me needed to stand inside her world for once and see whether the unease I'd been carrying had any real shape to it. The event was at a mid-range hotel ballroom pretending to be classier than it was. White tablecloths. Too much overhead lighting. Mini crab cakes on trays. Dana looked great, and I hated that I noticed how much effort she'd put into a work night when I could barely get 5 distracted minutes of eye contact over coffee at home. At first everything seemed normal. She introduced me to a few people from purchasing, One guy from finance, a woman from operations who immediately started talking about school districts even though we didn't have kids. Then Eric walked over. I knew it was him before Dana even said his name. Maybe because she straightened slightly when she saw him. Maybe because her smile arrived too fast, too naturally, like it had been waiting backstage all evening. He was early 40s, maybe, trim, confident without looking flashy, the kind of man who probably made competence feel charming. Not movie star handsome. Worse than that. Familiar handsome. Safe enough to pass, polished enough to pull attention. Dana introduced us with perfect normalcy. Eric shook my hand, looked me right in the eye, and made some easy joke about Dana being the only reason half their vendor issues ever got solved. I said something polite back, but my attention wasn't really on him. It was on her. The way she looked at him while he spoke. Not lustful. Not obvious. Just available in a way she had not been with me in a very long time. During dinner, he somehow ended up at our table. Again, maybe innocent. Maybe coincidence. But every time he spoke, Dana lit up half a degree. A little faster response. A little more attention. A little more of herself. She interrupted me once when I was telling a story about a contractor disaster at one of our clinics, but when Eric started describing some absurd supplier call, she leaned in like his words mattered. I remember sitting there with my napkin in my lap and wine in my glass, looking across the cheap ballroom table, and realizing emotional betrayal has a body language long before it has a confession. It lives in what gets your best attention. It lives in where your face wakes up. It lives in who gets the easy version of you while your spouse gets the leftovers and the lectures. On the drive home, Dana asked if I'd had an okay time. Okay time. Like I was somebody's plus one, not her husband. I said sure. Then I asked, as evenly as I could, whether she and Eric worked together that closely every day. Her whole tone changed immediately. Not defensive in a dramatic way. Sharper than that. More contemptuous. She said yes, obviously, because procurement worked with his department constantly, and she was not going to have one of those weird insecure conversations just because I noticed she was capable of being pleasant at a work event. One of those weird insecure conversations. That line sat between us the rest of the drive. She didn't just dismiss the question. She dismissed my right to notice what was happening in front of me. When we got home, Rusty was asleep by the back door, and Dana went upstairs without another word. I stayed down in the kitchen, standing in the dim light over the stove, staring at the half-empty glass she'd left by the sink. I thought back to all the times she told me marriage wasn't supposed to stay romantic. That affection settles. That intensity fades. That adults grow out of needing all that. And all I could think was this. She had not grown out of needing connection. She had just decided I wasn't where she wanted to find it anymore. After the supplier dinner, I stopped telling myself I needed hard proof before I was allowed to trust my own eyes. Not because I had proof of an affair. I still didn't. Not the kind you can hold up in a courtroom or send to a friend without sounding unhinged. But by then I had something that hurt almost as much. I had context. I had seen the way Dana came alive around Eric. I had seen how quickly she turned cold the second I tried to name what I was noticing. I had seen how smoothly she framed my discomfort as immaturity, as insecurity, as some flaw in me rather than a response to what she was actually doing. And once that pattern became clear, the whole house started feeling different. Sharper. Like I had been living inside a polite lie and finally learned where the walls were, so I stopped asking. That was the investigation. Not confrontation. Not speeches. Not emotional appeals she could dismiss with one practiced sigh. I let the silence open up and started paying attention to how she moved inside it. The first thing I noticed was timing. Dana's mood wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it. She could be flat with me all evening, moving around the kitchen with that same efficient detachment, asking whether I'd called the gutter guy or if Rusty's medication needed refilling, acting like the only point of our shared existence was to keep systems functioning. Then her phone would light up, or she'd step into the hallway for a call, or she'd come back from checking one quick thing for work, and suddenly she'd be lighter. Not warm with me. Just internally brighter. It was like watching somebody take a sip of water somewhere else and come home less thirsty. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I started noticing the daily seams. The way she never left her phone faced up if we were in the same room. The way she'd say she was tired after dinner, then perk up for 20 minutes alone in the laundry room. The way she started using vague corporate language for things that used to have specifics. A vendor follow-up. A quick sync. A department issue. Everything broad enough to sound legitimate and boring, which is exactly why it worked. One Tuesday, I got home a little after 6 and found Dana already in the kitchen, chopping onions with her phone propped against the toaster. She smiled at the screen before she saw me. A real smile. Small, private, unconscious. The second I walked in, it vanished. She turned the phone face down and asked if I had remembered to bring the batteries she needed for the thermostat panel. No hello. No how was your day. Just the batteries. I handed them over and said yes. Then I stood there watching her move around our kitchen, and for the first time I had the very clear, very ugly thought that my wife had trained herself to ration humanity around me. She could still laugh. Still glow. Still soften. She just delivered those things elsewhere and gave me the stripped-down administrative version of herself. That night, after she went upstairs, I sat on the back patio with Rusty and let the whole thing settle. I kept coming back to one question. If this was only a friendship, why did it need so much management? People don't hide the things they believe are harmless. They don't snap when you ask ordinary questions. They don't act offended that you notice their face has more life in it for another person than it does for their own spouse. Not unless the emotional truth is already too close to the surface. The next break came from a calendar, not because I went digging through her phone. I never got that far. Dana was too careful for that anyway. But we still had the old paper calendar hanging inside the pantry door, mostly for dog appointments, house stuff, family obligations, all the boring shared logistics that apparently still qualified as marriage in her mind. For months she'd barely used it. Everything lived on her phone now. Then one Wednesday morning, while I was getting coffee before work, I noticed she had written something in the square for Thursday night. Late review. That was it. No location. No context. Just late review in her tight, efficient handwriting. It bothered me immediately, not because people can't work late, but because Dana never used to write like that. If something actually mattered for the house, she'd note where she'd be or whether dinner was on me or if she'd be home after 9. This felt less like information and more like a placeholder. Something technical enough to shut down curiosity before it started. So Thursday I paid attention. At 5:30 she texted to say not to wait for her because the late review was dragging. I replied okay. No follow-up. No question marks. No opening for her to hear suspicion in my tone. By then I understood something important. The less I pushed, the sloppier the truth got. Around 7:15, I drove past her office on the way home from picking up Rusty's prescription. Her car wasn't there. That could have meant anything. Maybe they moved the meeting off-site. Maybe she carpooled. Maybe she'd gone to grab food. I knew all that. But the second I saw the empty space where her car should have been, something in my gut dropped hard enough that I pulled into a pharmacy lot and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Because deep down, I already knew I wasn't dealing with a woman whose work had gotten demanding. I was dealing with a woman who had learned how to disappear in plausible language. She got home at a little after 9. Takeout container in hand. Tired face ready. Voice clipped and flat. The whole performance was there before she even closed the door. She said the review had run long, then a few of them grabbed food because nobody had eaten. I asked where. She named a place near the office without even blinking. I nodded and let it go. Then, while she was upstairs showering, I looked in the outside trash bin because I hated myself enough by then to do it. The takeout bag on top was from somewhere else. Not near the office. Downtown. A nicer place. Sit-down food packaged for carryout, the kind people get after lingering somewhere they don't want to name. I stood there in the dark with the porch light on my back, staring down at that logo, and felt the whole story shift again. Not from suspicion to proof. From her to method. By Friday, I had started building a timeline in my head without meaning to. Late review. The supplier dinner. The hallway calls. The laundry room messages. The way Eric's name kept finding oxygen in rooms where nothing else between us did. It all started fitting together too well. Then Saturday handed me something worse than evidence. It handed me a witness. Dana was in the shower upstairs. I was in the kitchen giving Rusty his meds wrapped in peanut butter when her phone buzzed on the counter beside her purse. She had left it behind for once, probably because she'd been rushing. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. The screen lit up bright enough for me to see the preview. Eric. And one line underneath. Still thinking about last night? My whole body went cold. Not angry at first. Not even shocked. Just cold, like every small instinct I had been swallowing for months had finally turned physical inside me. I stared at the screen until it went dark again, then looked away so fast it almost felt superstitious, like if I acted quickly enough I could still preserve some last fraction of myself from what I already knew. Still thinking about last night? Not a work message. Not a vendor issue. Not a joke about spreadsheets. That was the moment the investigation stopped being about whether there was an emotional betrayal. That part was over. Now it was about scale. How far it had gone. How long it had been living in my house without my permission. Whether I was looking at a wife on the edge of an affair or a man who was already the last to be informed his marriage had become a side room in someone else's emotional life. Dana came downstairs 10 minutes later in leggings and a sweatshirt, hair damp, face fresh, moving through the kitchen like nothing had changed. She asked if I wanted eggs. Asked if I had remembered we needed to be at her mother's by 1 on Sunday. Asked whether I could finally deal with the loose cabinet hinge in the laundry room. I looked at her while she spoke. Really looked. And what hit me hardest was not rage. It was the split. The same woman who had spent months telling me romance was childish, closeness was unrealistic, tenderness was a phase adults outgrew, had just received a message from another man carrying exactly the kind of emotional charge she insisted no longer belonged in marriage. Not gone. Redirected. That was always the truth. She noticed I was staring and asked what. I almost said it right there. Almost asked whether Eric was still thinking about last night because of something she said. Something she wore, something she let happen. The words got all the way to the back of my teeth. Then I stopped. Because some truths break open cleaner when the other person still thinks they're in control of the timing. So I just said nothing. And for the first time since all of this began, Dana looked faintly uneasy. I didn't confront Dana that morning. That was the part that surprised me most. A month earlier, maybe even a week earlier, I probably would have. Not because I'm impulsive. Because pain makes you desperate for clarity, and desperate people mistake speed for control. But by the time I saw Eric's message on her screen, something in me had changed. I wasn't confused anymore. Confusion had been her shelter. Every time I brought her the distance, she buried me in language. I was dramatic. I was insecure. I wanted a movie marriage. I needed to grow up. Now I had something simple. Still thinking about last night? No speech could launder that. So I stayed quiet. I fixed eggs I didn't want, listened to Dana talk about her mother's lunch and the cabinet hinge and whether Rusty's meds needed reordering, and watched her move around the kitchen like she still believed she controlled the meaning of everything in our house. She did not. Not anymore. That whole day, I felt strangely calm. Not peaceful. Just clear in a way that made everything around me look sharper. The sink. The dog bowls. The stack of unopened mail by the toaster. The woman folding towels in the laundry room while another man's message sat in my head like a nail. I knew two things by then. First, the emotional betrayal was real. That part was done. I had heard it in her voice, seen it in her face, watched it in her body language, and now read it in words she never thought I'd see. Second, if I confronted her too early, she would try to turn evenness into interpretation. Coworker's joke. You took it wrong. It was about a meeting. It was emotional shorthand. Nothing happened. I could hear all of it already. So I waited one more day. Not because I needed more proof. Because I needed her to speak before I did. Sunday afternoon at her mother's house was exactly the kind of performance that made the whole thing feel obscene. Dana laughed in the kitchen with her sister. Helped plate food. Asked me in front of everyone if I could look at a loose rail on her mom's back steps before winter. Same tone as always. Same quiet conversion of husband into handyman. At one point her mother joked that after 12 years we had this marriage thing figured out, and Dana smiled and said routine was underrated. Routine. I looked across that dining room at my wife saying that with a straight face, and all I could think was that routine is a very convenient mask when you're living two emotional lives at once. We got home around 4. Rusty went straight to his bed in the living room and collapsed with the heavy sigh old dogs make when they've had enough family noise for one day. Dana changed clothes, put on one of her loose house sweaters, and started making a grocery list at the kitchen island. It was such a normal scene that it almost made me feel crazy again, almost. Then her phone buzzed beside her hand. She looked down. And I saw it happen. That tiny private shift in her face. The softening. The spark. The part of her that had been rationed away from me for months arriving instantly for someone else. She smiled before she could stop herself. That was enough. I walked over, stood across from her at the island, and asked if Eric was still thinking about last night. The blood drained out of her face so fast it was almost unreal. For 1 second, maybe less, Dana looked completely unguarded. No polished explanation. No disdain. No practiced patience. Just shock. Real, naked shock. Then the defenses started rushing back in. She put her phone face down and asked what I was talking about. I said it again. Asked if Eric was still thinking about last night. This time slower. She stared at me, and I watched her decide in real time which version of the lie she was going to try first. She asked if I had gone through her phone. I told her no. I told her she left it on the counter, it lit up, and I saw enough. Then I said what mattered before she could pivot again. I was done being handled. Done being told I was dramatic for noticing that all the warmth she denied me had not disappeared. It had just moved. She sat down on one of the stools by the island. Not because she was sorry, not yet. Because she needed time. I stayed standing. Then I asked the question that had already been answered emotionally but still needed words. I asked whether something was going on between her and Eric. She did not say no. That hurt more than I expected. You can prepare yourself for a confession and still get hit by the silence before it. After a few seconds, she said it wasn't that simple. And I actually laughed. Just once. Short and ugly. Because betrayal is always simple at its core. People complicate it afterward to soften the edges. But the center of it is brutally plain. You take what belongs in one place and you move it somewhere else. You feed one relationship by starving another. You let someone keep loving a version of marriage you've already replaced in your own mind. I told her to stop packaging it. Then I asked again. This time she said yes. Not loudly. Not with tears. Just yes, in a voice so flat it almost sounded tired. She said it started as friendship. That was how she framed it. Of course it was. Work stress. Shared frustrations. Long calls. Easy banter. Someone who got her. Someone who still made her feel interesting, sharp, seen. I stood there listening to my wife describe a textbook emotional affair using the vocabulary of self-discovery, and every sentence made the last year of my life make more sense in the worst possible way. I asked whether it had become physical. That was the real reveal, and she knew it. For the first time since I started talking, Dana looked down, then she nodded. Once. That was all. I remember gripping the back of the dining chair beside me because I suddenly needed something solid under my hand. Not because I was going to explode. Because the room had gone strange around the edges. All those months of being treated like a maintenance guy in my own home. All those lectures about romance fading and tenderness being childish and marriage growing up into logistics. All of it collapsed at once under the weight of one fact. She hadn't outgrown intimacy. She had relocated it. I asked how long. She said a few weeks physically. Longer emotionally. Since late summer, maybe earlier. The supplier dinner wasn't the beginning. Just one of the first times she stopped hiding how easy it felt. The late reviews, the hallway calls, the phone smiles, the weird brightness that never belonged to me anymore, all of it had been part of something already alive. I asked if she loved him. She said she didn't know. That answer finished the marriage more than the sex did. Because I don't know means the door is still open in her mind. It means she was standing in our kitchen, 12 years in, looking at me from inside an equation where I was no longer the obvious choice. Then came the part that really broke something in me. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen like this. Said our marriage had felt like roommates for a long time. Said she got tired of feeling managed by the house, the bills, the routines, the endless sameness. Said Eric made her feel awake again. Awake. I told her she did not get to use the emptiness she helped create as an excuse for where she went to escape it. She had spent months telling me romance was unrealistic while building a secret little version of it with someone else. She had looked me in the face and called me dramatic for grieving a distance she already understood perfectly well because she was busy spending closeness elsewhere. That made her cry. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just enough to make her voice shake. But even then I couldn't feel what I maybe would have years earlier. Because by then the tears felt late. They belonged to consequence, not conscience. I asked one more question. I asked if anybody at work knew. She hesitated. That told me enough. Maybe not everybody. Maybe not officially. But hesitation means the secrecy was no longer just between two people. It means the affair had already started shaping the air around it. Shared looks. Covered moments. A workplace ecosystem learning how to pretend. I told her to pack a bag. She looked up at me like she had expected anger, a scene, maybe a long desperate argument about whether we could fix this. But there was nothing left to negotiate that night. I had already spent too much time arguing for tenderness with someone who was giving it away in secret. She asked if we could talk in the morning. I told her we had been talking for a year. She had just been answering someone else. That landed. She packed in silence. I stayed downstairs with Rusty, one hand on his back while I listened to drawers open and close overhead. The house felt unbelievably still between the sounds. When she came down with an overnight bag, She looked smaller somehow. Less certain. She said she was sorry. I believed she was sorry the way people are sorry when what they built in private finally has to stand under real light. It didn't matter. After she left, I walked through the house turning off lights room by room. Kitchen. Hallway. Laundry room. Bedroom. It struck me how normal the motions felt. That's the ugliest thing about betrayal. The world doesn't pause for it. Your marriage can split in half and the dishwasher still needs unloading. The aftermath was not dramatic. Just final. I called a lawyer that week. We separated finances. Worked through the house. Told family in the cleanest language possible because I had no interest in performing my humiliation for an audience. Dana and Eric did not turn into some grand love story, at least not from what I heard later. Affairs rarely survive daylight as well as they survive secrecy. Real life makes demands fantasy never budgets for. As for me, the strangest part was what hurt most in the end. Not the hotel nights, though there were probably more than she admitted. Not the messages. Not even the lies. It was realizing she had spent months trying to convince me that the kind of connection I wanted was childish while she was actively chasing that exact connection somewhere else. That's what made the whole thing feel cruel instead of merely broken. Looking back, the marriage didn't die when she slept with him. It died when she turned me into a roommate for safety and someone else into a man for warmth. By the time I understood that, the affair was almost beside the point.